Well, hello, everybody. This is Brendan Baylott from the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group. I'd like to welcome you all to another weekly episode of Great Lakes Shipwrecks Live. I hope everybody is staying safe and enjoying their time away in their house to do research or organize your collection or whatever you want to do. It's another great show tonight. I hope you can all hear me okay. It's been a little lag sometimes. The internet's been getting a little slow because of all the people on it. Bear with me. I'm getting a little sand in the wheels of my chair here too. It's not meant to be on the beach like this, but I'll try to make the best of it. Tonight we've got a great guest, so I'm real excited. Tom Kowalczyk from Cleveland Underwater Explorers is with us. I have known Tom for many years, ever since Tom, I think it was when I came to talk about the Griffin at the Great Lakes Historical Society's annual meeting. Wasn't that it when we first met?
That could be.
It was. This was, oh gosh, maybe nigh on 15 years ago. So Tom Kowalczyk, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And Tom is, kind of one of the premier research guys on Lake Erie, if not the. And he and I have a lot in common in that we're really kind of the guys that like to dig into the primary source material, and we're interested in finding ships that are still missing. So, it's going to be a really special hour tonight. But before we get going, I want to do some housekeeping. So first of all, I'd like to remind everybody that the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group is it's our social media community for people who are interested in wreck hunting on the Great Lakes and in Great Lakes shipwrecks in general. We just recently crossed the 2,000 member line, so congratulations to the community. It's really proving to be an excellent group. People are posting wonderful content, excellent questions. We get new unidentified wreck reports all the time, and the community comes together to help answer those. So thanks everybody who does that. In celebration of our 2000th member, we're having the Inland Seas Online Shipwreck Festival on Saturday the 25th. Number of good speakers lined up for that. I will be publishing those this week yet, and we'll get the docket up. So if you're not doing anything on Saturday the 25th, come online, 10 a.m. We're going to kick it off with our first presenter, another one at 11. We'll take off an hour for lunch. We'll have a 1 o'clock and a 2 o'clock and a 3 o'clock presenter. And then at 4 o'clock, we're going to have a Zoom room with live socialization and the beverage of your choice. So hopefully we'll see how that goes. Should be a lot of fun. We can all tell tall tales about the shipwrecks we didn't find. Also, the show is, as you know, weekly right now, and probably for the foreseeable future. Next week's guest is going to be Kevin Ailes from the Michigan Underwater Preserve Council. Should be an excellent show. Michigan has a very large underwater preserve system. It's been around for a long time. I was very active in starting the Keweenaw Underwater Preserve, or at least in its early days, and I'm a big fan of them. So please tune in next week for Kevin. And after that, we have Mark Sprang, who is the archivist from the Historical Collections of the Great Lakes at Bowling Green State University. So a couple of great guests. A little bit of other housekeeping stuff. Tom lives in a rural area, and his connection is a little spotty sometimes. You might find that his voice chops out every once in a while. We're aware of it, but it's pretty good. You won't see it too often, so don't worry. You're going to see a little clipping on Tom's voice. We tested it, and there's not much we can do about it, but I think we're going to be okay. Also, feel free to ask your questions to Tom throughout the show, and feel free to post them in the chat, and Tom will take your questions. So we have a great show lined up for you tonight, and really eager to get into it, and we have a lot to cover tonight, so let's get going. Tom, again, welcome to the show, and same thing I usually ask most of our folks is, how did you get involved in this, and what led you to get interested in finding the shipwrecks on Lake Erie?
Well, good evening. My name's Tom Kowalczyk. I'm a Great Lakes junkie. It's been pretty much a lifelong. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong. All right, we'll get back here. You got the picture of my first boat. We can put my first boat up there. Show everybody how I got started in shipwreck diving in Lake Erie. I've always been around the water since I was really little. I know that's sure, but that's me in my first boat. It was a 55-gallon drum that was cut in half, and we lived right on the beach, right on the water, and I used to row around in that thing out in front of the house when I was really young. That pretty much started my my lifelong interaction with the water and with Great Lakes, and especially Lake Erie here. I got into diving about 1965, and of course Lake Erie is not known for its great water clarity. It's not like lakes or any of the ocean going stuff, so we had limited visibility, and shipwrecks became the greatest interest that we had. And I learned about shipwrecks when I went to the dive shop to get refills on the scuba tank. We were diving in quarries up here, and that got me interested in the shipwrecks, but there weren't a lot of them that were publicly known, and this was way, way, way before GPS or any kind of position, location type of stuff that was available. So I got a hold of a shipwreck chart. Everybody has to start somewhere, and I started with Captain Hamilton's shipwreck chart. You got a picture of that too, Brendan. I think that's listed on there. And it was specifically about the western end of Lake Erie, which was, this is my backyard. And there's 200 shipwrecks listed on this. They bought it for $1, and that started really the bulk of my shipwreck interest, the research, and the diving out here in Lake Erie. And I took the information off of this chart, and a lot of this is posted on my website that I put up, and it's been there for a long, long time, that lists all these shipwrecks, and I've got coded and cataloged by ones that's been found, ones that are still out there that we're looking for, and ones that we know from research that either have been removed or they were salvaged early on and they no longer exist as far as in the lake. And there's the list of them right there. The red are ones that don't exist or are not in the lake to be found. The blue ones are the ones that's already been located that I found or found. And of course, my goal is to find everyone on that list, and I'll find them all unless somebody gets to them first. But they'll all be found if they're out there to be found. That's for certain. So,
Tom, what's the URL for that? Is it give people the URL? It's lake.cros.net is Tom's site. Excellent site for Lake.
Yeah, Lake is Lake LAKE .cross.net, and you can go there. There's a whole bunch of other stuff besides these pages, but if anyone has information on any of these vessels that are listed here, or anyone that I don't have listed that you're willing to share, I'd be more than happy to get with you, talk with you, or find out if you can share the information so I can complete the listing. Like I said, I want to be able to cross everything off of that list and either identify it as being found or not being in existence, or at least finding out what happened to it. So I appreciate any help that I can get. So early on, I was a member of the Great Lakes Historical Society when they were in Vermilion. And of course, most people know that they've moved to Toledo and they're now the National Museum of the Great Lakes. And as a member, I would receive the Inland Seas, was their quarterly journal, and they had some really cool information in there. And back in the 60s and 70s, they had firsthand accounts yet of captains and pilots, people that actually was out sailing on the lake vessels. And their journals went back all the way to 1945, I think is when they first started the first journal and recording this information. And I looked on the internet and the old rare book sellers, and every once in a while you could find one for sale and go back and pick those up. And of course, libraries and a lot of research institutions, they had complete sets of them. But like anything else, it was all printed paper, and you had to go through and read them and look at, page by page to find stuff. We were coming into the computer age, and I'd run across some really good scanning software and some OCR equipment. So I approached the executive director of the Great Lakes Historical Society, it was William O'Brien at the time, about digitizing all these back issues of the Inland Seas. And so you can see Brendan's got my webpage up here. That's when I started with the original 1945 copy of the Inland Seas, and I scanned those into the computer, ran them through the OCR to convert them so that they were fully searchable, and saved them out as PDF files. And we managed to get through all the 20th century up to 1999. And we stopped at that point because Inland Seas was getting PDF files of all the publications from that point on. So they've got the complete set. It's all digitized. You can search on any keyword you want to put in. So if you're looking for a specific thing, it'll go through all of these issues all the way back to the original one, and it'll let you know any instance that information was listed there. And it was a huge, huge project. But that kind of established and formalized my relationship with the Great Lakes Historical Society. And after that was done, that continued. The Great Lakes Historical Society, National Museum of the Great Lakes, is a sponsor for CLUE. All of the work that we do on the lake, any project work that we have, all filters through the Great Lakes Historical Society, and they run all the projects that we do. We've had several of them. That's the picture of CLUE's website. That's the base. That's the default page for the CLUE website there. And we've got some of our recent projects that we've worked on is listed there, and there's a lot of information about our group. CLUE is founded by David Van Zandt. Some of you people may know David. He's a nuclear scientist. He works for a company that supports the International Space Station that's circulating around there, and he does a lot of the project work and equipment that goes up there during his day job. His weekend job is working out of Cleveland, and him and Kevin McGee were the original founders of CLUE, and they recruited Jim Paskert, who was a Cleveland local that did a lot of very early shipwreck searching and researching and diving on some of the shipwrecks out off of Cleveland. And I knew Jim from way, way, way back time. So I met David at a MAST meeting. MAST is the Marine Archaeological Survey team that was started here in Ohio as part of an avocational archaeological project that vocational divers could get involved in and working on recording and documenting shipwrecks here. So I was at the annual meeting, and Dave got seated at my table, and we got to talking. Not long after that, he asked me to join his group. And I kind of wasn't really that interested in doing any kind of formal organized group type stuff. And Jim Paskert called me after a couple of weeks, says, "How come you haven't called Dave back?" And I says, "I wasn't really interested. I was just doing my thing." And he says, "Well, you really need to get involved." He says, "I'm part of the team. I'm working with them, and they're really, really into this. I think we can do some really good stuff here in the lake if we pool our resources and we get together and work on this." So he convinced me to get started, and I joined in 2006. And that's when we announced that I had found the steamboat Anthony Wayne. Anthony Wayne was probably my biggest find that I had at the time.
So before we start talking about that, then that is probably a really a huge find. I just wanted to mention the significance of that inland seas digitization, because you and I both collected full runs of those things, but it was so hard to search them. And now I use those every single time I research a ship, and I think many other people do. Tom, are they still available? Can people still buy those CDs of the inland seas?
The Great Lakes Historical Society, when they were in Vermilion, they always had overruns, and they had copies of back issues. And a lot of times they had members would donate them when they were clearing out their stuff, and they didn't want to keep those files anymore. So they had a lot of them available in back issues, and they would sell them for $5 a copy. When they moved from Vermilion into Toledo at the museum, I think they got rid of all that. I don't think they have anything available.
Can you buy?
But you can pick them up through online, Abe Books, and a lot of the rare book dealers. And
right, but
you can search for them on the internet. There's a lot of people that still have them listed, and you can buy them.
Right. What I was asking is, where can you buy the CDs?
The CDs are available from the marina, or from the museum, the Great Lakes Museum in Toledo.
Cool. All right. Very cool. Well, then let's move on.
They have them there in the gift store.
Let's move on and talk about the Anthony Wayne then. A really amazing site, as I understand it. It's the earliest steamer that's diveable on the Great Lakes, and also the first ship on the National Register of Historic Places in Ohio. Really quite an amazing story. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, well, when I got involved with Dave and Jim and Clue, there were, of course, Kevin McGee was part of that group. Jim Paskert he was the main researcher that worked on that stuff, and Rob Richley is a member of the team also. And we started talking about pooling resources and what we had available to work with, and doing research and finding stuff. Just to give the viewers an idea of what we work with, the group, Clue has available 3 Klein 595 side scan sonar units, and we've got 5 different towfish that have different frequencies, multiple frequencies, and different uses. We've got 2 Imagenics yellowfin side scan sonars, and we have a Geometrics marine magnetometer that we use. I think we got some pictures of those on the boat. And we've got 2 ROVs. The ROVs aren't a whole lot of help here in Lake Erie, because by the time you see something, you crash into it. But we have them, and we've tried to use them a couple times. So like I mentioned earlier, GPS is probably the most significant technological advancement that's benefited shipwreck research, because it allows you to know exactly where you are and what you're doing when you're out there, and where you've been and where you need to go. And side scan expands the ability to find something just tremendously. The amount of area that you can cover with the side scan is just incredible. So I was using that. I was using the Imagenics yellowfin in the shallow water. That's primarily a shallow water unit that I use. It's capable of much more depth, but it's really easy, and it's much more practical to use in the shallow water. And we use the Kleins when we get out over about 50 or 60 feet. Then we start using the Kleins, because they've got better signal strength, and they've a little bit better imaging for the deeper water. But the Anthony Wayne was found in 2006, and I was using the Imagenics at the time. There's a close-up image of it. I really like that picture, because you can see in the upper left-hand corner behind the paddle wheels, the shadows of those paddles are shown out there in the end. And right in the center, where the main crankshaft goes and the coupling, you can see the shadows behind the box, and where the pitman arm goes up to the engine. And the thing way over on the right is the bow section, and the 2 anchors. If you look really, really hard on the very right-hand side, just below the bow part of it, is the wood stock of the 1 anchors laying right up against the hull there. Wow. But in between it is nothing but mud. The paddle wheels stick up, and the bow section sticks up. Everything else is buried. So we started a project. Once we'd gathered enough information that we could confirm that it was the Anthony Wayne, we got together with Great Lakes Historical Society and Texas A&M University, their underwater archaeological group participated. They sent 3 students up for 2 summers. And in 2 summers, we went out and we worked on surveying all of this. And we did some dredging with all the proper permits, of course, and uncovered part of the steam engine. And like Brendan said, this is the oldest found side wheel, paddle wheel steamer in the Great Lakes. It was built in 1837. It sank in 1850. Now I know there's older side, schooners and paddle wheelers out there, but this is the oldest one that you can actually go to and touch and swim around and see. And it's got a horizontal steam engine, which is just incredible. There's bunches of those things in museums and other places on land, but I don't know of any other one that you can see in the water. Connected, how it's connected with the Pitman arm and the slide couplings and all that stuff that's down there. It's really, really old stuff.
Very cool.
And it was interesting in the survey work that we did, the way the paddles are mounted on the paddle wheels. There was a lot of technological improvements that happened over the years concerning drag and interference and how much power it took and what size they were supposed to be, and even the way they're fastened and attached into the paddle wheels is something that was pretty interesting because it's such an early example of that kind of work. So we spent a couple years working on it. Carrie Soden from the Great Lakes Historical Society, she was the lead archaeologist on the project. We ended up writing up a very detailed report, and that got submitted for our application to be listed on the National Registry of Historic Places. So the Anthony Wayne is the first shipwreck in Ohio and from Lake Erie that's on that list. We're working on a couple other ones here that we want to get included with that, but that was our first one. So that was really quite an accomplishment from the team, I thought.
Very, very much so. And one of the things that really amazes me about Lake Erie in general is how much older the wrecks are there than the wrecks over here on Lakes Michigan and Superior. I mean, some of these sites you guys find are true archaeological sites and really early sites with great historical importance. But the thing that really blew my mind when I was over there talking with you 15 years ago was the Battle of Lake Erie happened there, the War of 1812. And you guys did some work on it.
1813, when they came up with the bicentennial celebration here, back in 2013, we got together and we were kind of brainstorming and all the information. There was a lot of public talk about the battle and the War of 1812 and all that. And we were talking one time, says, how cool it would be if we went out there and found the actual anchorage site after the battle had occurred when Perry won the fight. A lot of people don't realize it, but they anchored out in the middle of the lake overnight, and they cleaned up their vessels and secured a lot of the damage that was done, broken everything. And they actually did burial at sea for all the British sailors that had been killed on the British boats are all buried out there at that anchorage site. The traditional cannonball in the bottom of the hammock and over the side. And so we talked about trying to find that specific location in conjunction with the bicentennial for the Battle of Lake Erie and the War of 1812. Put together some ideas, talked to a few people, and we ended up getting funded for the project by the National Park Service. They were interested in it as well, and they thought it would be appropriate to identify it possibly as a national park site. At that time. So we did quite a bit of work. And of course, Western Lake Erie is all mud. We get, well, I won't say what it is come down to us, but it's pretty soft and it's pretty thick and it covers the bottom of the lake. And so there was no vessels that were sunk in the battle. They all survived with wreckage, but none of them sunk. But there's an awful lot of cannonballs out there. if you go back through and you walk through the chronological time frame for the battle and the frequency for which they were firing the cannons, there's thousands and thousands of cannonballs that were launched and fired at each other over that time frame. And there'd been a couple of shows on like the History Channel where they went out and did surveys of the Little Bighorn fight with Custer and how they worked the battle time frame through with written information that they had, and they matched these things up with what historic information they had to kind of recreate the battle. So that's what we were going to do. We were going to go out there and look for these cannonball and see if we could pick up the trail and match that up with the recorded record for how the battle supposedly went. And Brendan, I think you put up the picture of the cannonballs that we were finding. They weren't cannonballs. They were 150 millimeter mortar shells, howitzer shells that were fired out there from a local campsite that was doing howitzer repairs after World War II. They still exist. They're out there, but this is what we were finding. Those get off one heck of a mag signature when you run over top of them, and they're all in the same place, and there's thousands and thousands of those out there as well. So we can't tell the difference between 150 millimeter mag hit on a mortar shell and a cannonball. Unfortunately, we didn't find any cannonballs. This picture here is our mag survey. Every one of those red circles is a mag hit from something that's buried in the bottom of the lake. And that was our survey path that we did over 2 years. That's about 5.5 miles long and about 3 miles wide.
Wow.
And there's just tons of stuff that's buried under the bottom. We were using underwater magnetometers. When we'd isolate a particular target and we'd put a buoy on it, we'd send a diver down with an underwater handheld mag, and they'd survey a circle around the buoy until they got a hit, and they'd bring up beer cans or all kinds of metal stuff and lots of those 150 millimeter. We didn't bring many of them up because they're supposed to be inert. They're not supposed to have any detonation on them, but they do have, some of them have powder. That one's got a ring in the nose. That was the lifting ring that they used to move them around. They would unscrew those and put the detonator on the tip of that, screw that in where that lifting ring is. And we found some of them without lifting rings, so we didn't mess with them after that. We left them on the bottom.
That's crazy, man. So did you find any cannonballs?
No, never found a cannonball. And we did do very intense, very detailed, very precise calibrations for the magnetometer and how far away it could get from a cannonball, what kind of a signature. We got a couple of cannonballs from the Niagara that they had on the when they sailed around in the vessel. They were used on the boat, and Carrie contacted one of her friends there, and they sent us up a couple of 5-pound cannonballs, and we used those as basically as targets. We put them in a dive sack and drop them into the bottom of the lake with a marker buoy on it, and we'd run past it and see what kind of signature the mag would give us. And we found that we had to be within about 5 feet of the bottom to be able to pick them up. And we could repeatedly do it and be able to know when we got a target on these trials. So that's how we conducted the survey, and very confident that we covered the area. And they're down there. It's just we spent a lot of bottom time crawling around the bottom looking for this stuff, but there's so much other stuff down there. It'll just be luck that we find a cannonball instead of some of this other stuff. And with that, we just ran out of time. We ran out of divers in the end of the season, and when we wrote our final report to the Park Service, they elected not to continue. We were willing to go on, but they said it really wasn't worth it anymore, so they decided to let it go. There is a buoy that's placed out in the general area for where the battle was supposed to be taking place, but it's a best guess. There's no geological or evidence from the battle at all that's used to place that, just written history on it.
So Tom, I just wanted to take a look and say for our viewers, feel free to ask questions and post them. if you want. Let's see if we can get to some of those. But so Tom, you were telling me a story that really cracked me up about you and Carrie Stoughton. Was that during the War of 1812 work that happened, or when was that?
Yeah, that was on one of the trips. You're going to make me tell that story.
I'm afraid so. We've got some time, and I just about shit myself when you told me that before.
Well, the second year of the project, when we went out and we were continuing the survey work, we started early, about this time of the year. And I got my boat in the water early, and we got all the equipment on it. And we didn't have any divers at that time, and we weren't doing diving. We were still trying to finish up on some of those survey tracks that you saw on the other image there. So Carrie and I were going out on my boat, and we left the harbor and went up near the islands, and it was real foggy, kind of a misty day. It was nice and quiet and calm. It's a springtime area up here. We get a lot of real low visibility, horizontal visibility, because of the water temperature and the air temperature change, and it really restricts the visibility. And we're cruising along, and out of the mist, this huge boat shows up. It's just off of our port side a little bit, and we get closer to it, and we can define anything. And Carrie goes, "Oh my God, it's the Mackinac!" And it was the Coast Guard Mackinac that was coming down from the upper lakes. I don't know where it was going, but it was cruising along, and we went past it real close, and we kept on going, and it disappeared into the mist, and I didn't think much more about it. And we went another 10 miles or so to get to our search area, and we got out, and the water's only about 30 foot deep out there. So with the mag and the side scan out, to get it down close to the bottom, I got put out a lot of line, a lot of the cables connecting these things to get them down there. So it's critical that I got to keep the boat moving, because if I stop, all the equipment's going to crash into the bottom. So I got to get the boat going and then feed the lines out to get them out to get to where they're supposed to be. And then I got to pull them back in before I stop the boat, so that these, they don't fall into the bottom, crash onto the bottom. So we're set up and we're running our track lines, and I'm holding the course with the GPS, and we're monitoring all this stuff. And what happens out of the gloom and the mist, there's the Mackinac. And it's coming right at us on a collision course. And I was like, now what am I going to do? I mean, do they see us? Are they going to stop? What's going on? And because I got to make a decision about pulling all this gear or changing course or doing something, and they go dead in the water. They stop. So I said, okay, great. And then I see what they're doing. They got a crew out on the deck, and they're launching their little hard bottom inflatable boat. And right away, I know they're going to come over and do a Coast Guard inspection on me. I was the only boat out there. I mean, there was nobody else around. I guess they were, I don't know what they were thinking about it, but they sent the boat over, and they had 5 guys in this little launch, and they come up alongside. Of course, I'm still running. I'm going slow, and I'm surveying. They pull up alongside, and they say, "Stop your boat. We want to board." And I'm like, "Really? You guys got to do this now?" I mean, we're doing this highly sensitive scientific study out here. We're trying to find the battle site, the Park Service project, all that kind of stuff. And they said, "Stop your boat. We want to board." And I kind of resisted, and they got more insistent. And so finally I says, "Okay, well, I'm going to have to pull all this stuff in and get it into the boat, and then I'll be able to stop once I get all the gear on board." And so they're motoring along with us, and and the whole back of the boat is covered with cable now. It's just because I couldn't put anything away. I just hauled it in, and it's all piled up in the back of the boat. And I get the boat stopped, and they come up along the transom. The 2 guys get out onto the swim platform, and I say, "Don't stand on the cables." So they step over the transom, and what do? They stand on all the cables that are piled up in the back of the boat. And there was big guy and little guy. And I think big guy was kind of like, he was the senior one, and little guy maybe was a first-year trainee ensign or something that they had, and they had to go out and do this. So he's got the clipboard with the paperwork, and they want to do a boat inspection on me. And so the first question big guy asks, he says, "You have any weapons on board?" And I look at his sidearm, and I say, "Only the ones you brought with you." And he didn't think that was too funny. And so he asked for ID. And wouldn't you know it, of all the times I go out in the boat, I mean, what do I need an ID on my boat for? So I didn't bring my wallet with me on this trip. I had no information, no ID, no nothing that said who I was. Well, Carrie's in her purse. She's digging through her purse, and she comes up with her driver's license. She hands it to the little guy who's got the paperwork. And big guy's saying, well, what do you got to identify? He says, you got a registration for the boat. And I says, yeah, I got that. So I open up the cabinet and I get the registration out. I says, is this your boat? I said, yes, sir. This is my boat. And he says, well, it says this belongs to Gail. Gail's my wife. Boat was registered in her name. I didn't think of that. He says, you don't look like Gail.
Oh, no.
And I says, well, it's my, he says, well, spell your last name, spell the name. And I spell it. And he says, that's not the way it's spelled on here. And I'm thinking, oh, what's going on here now? I'm starting to get a little nervous about how this is going. And so big guy standing there, and he turns the little guy, and he says, watch my back. And he turns away from me, and he's got the little walkie-talkie with the microphone on his, hooked on his collar there. And the little guy puts the clipboard down, grabs his gun. And I look over at the boat next to us. It's got 3 other coasties in it, and they all got their hands on their gun. And I'm thinking, whoa, now maybe this thing, you better not be getting out of control here. And so I'm getting nervous now. Instead of being kind of funny, lighthearted about the whole thing, I shut up and I'm yes, no, whatever he wants to know after that. And I don't know who he was talking to. He probably called over to the big boat, the Mackinac, and they probably called in someplace. So anyway, he comes back on and says, okay, this is fine. We're all done. No problem. He tells the little guy, he says, well, write down this stuff on here. And he says, little guy says, well, wait a minute. Her name's not Kowalczyk. Her name's, and Carrie's saying, no, we're not. I'm an archaeologist. And the big guy says, we don't need to know what you guys are doing. There's no problem. And Carrie's saying, no, it's not like that. You don't understand. And the big guy says, well, we don't need to know anymore. That's not anything we're interested in. And so then he decides, well, we got to see your oil discharge plaque. And I says, really? Come on. And he says, no, we got to finish the inspection. I got to see the plaque. And I says, well, it's under the deck, under your feet, under all of that cable, under the carpet, under the hatch cover. Says, got to see it. So now I got to decide. I know it's down there, but I can't remember which side it's on. And luckily, I got the right side. I opened it up. I lifted the hatch just barely. He could peek into it. And he says, yep, okay, I see it. It's there. They were done. They were happy. So things kind of went back to normal then. So I says, well, you guys are down here at the Mackinac. I said, I thought the Mackinac stayed up on the big lakes. And the guy looks at me. He says, well, Lake Erie is a big lake. And I says, well, what are you guys doing down here and how long are you going to be? And he says, you don't need to know that. So I says, well, if you're going to stick around, you probably got some really good gear on that thing. You can help us do this survey if you want to. And little guy's saying, oh, yeah, we got divers and we got forward sector scanning sonar and we got this. And then big guy says, that's all you need to know. And so we parted on good company, but it was quite a ordinary, something most people wouldn't have to go through. I was really something different early in the lakes on Lake Erie with the Coast Guard.
Tom, thank you for indulging my.
So that's my.
Thanks for indulging me with that story. I just got the biggest kick out of that because anybody who looks for shipwrecks on the Great Lakes has a similar story. Maybe not that colorful and not that humorous, but when we're hauling those cables around out there, whether it's the Coast Guard, the DNR, the state police, they always are very curious about what you're doing, and they always seem to assume the worst. So thanks for sharing that, Tom. Let's switch gears and talk about another interesting early wreck with a heck of an interesting story, the Argo.
Yeah, that was something else too. The Argo was basically it was a barge, oil barge, oil carrier. And it was from New York Harbor, East Coast stuff, back in 1937. The Argo was never intended to be on the Great Lakes. It was a harbor and rivers barge that they used for hauling all kinds of liquid goods back and forth around between the major ports, up the rivers, and mostly Lake Erie or New York and Long Island area. But the owner got this great idea when they started using refining oil for gasoline, that he could buy some really cheap oil up at Sault Ste. Marie, where the steel mills were making coke, and they were using coal as a main source for generating the coke, and the oil was a byproduct that they got off of that process. They couldn't use it, so they had it in storage, and they figured that they found out that he could sell it to people. So he ran the barge behind a tugboat from the East Coast all the way up to the Sioux to pick up this load of oil. And on the way back, they got out in Lake Erie and got into a really bad storm, and the Argo sunk. That was in 1937. They did a huge search for it. Of course, no one was killed. The crew members got off of it, and the tug recovered them. But the Coast Guard put on a huge search for the wreck because it was full of this oil. And the Argo was listed in 2000, maybe 2010, 2012. Congress passed a law. It was called Roulette. It was designed to find the most significant environmental risks in the United States. It was tasked to NOAA, and NOAA came up with a list of 573 vessels that fit into that category of potential environmental disasters. And out of that 573, they filtered those down through impact, potential, likelihood of leakage, and the effect that they might have if they did. And that reduced the list to 87 vessels. And the Argo was listed as the #1 greatest risk for environmental catastrophe on the Great Lakes. And I found it. It'd been there since 1937. So, and I wasn't looking for it. I was looking for my long lost and still to be found schooner Lexington. And that's part of, I just keep searching and expanding my search area because I haven't found the Lexington yet. But I found a bunch of other things that were out there, and the Argo was one of them. So we got a hold of the Great Lakes Historical Society right away after we figured out what it was. And Jim Paskert and I looked through the research, and we got the clue group together, and we reviewed all the information that we could put together, and we were convinced that this was the Argo. There was no question in our mind. And so we got a hold of Chris Gilchrist and Great Lakes Kerry Soden. We talked to them about it. And we said, this is just too significant. We got to let the Coast Guard know. So we got a hold of the Coast Guard, and we set up a meeting with the commander of the 9th District in Cleveland. They are in charge of the entire Coast Guard operations on all of the Great Lakes. So we met with them, and they kind of took a hands back, sit back attitude. So you got to prove all this to us. We hear what you say, but you're just normal people. I mean, you're not a professional. You're not commercial operators. You're just people out there. So you got to prove to us what you're saying. So I had a nice 8x10 glossy made up of the picture that you see there on the screen, and I opened the folder and shoved that over to the commander, and he looked at it and he says, "Yep, that's it. The oil tanker, all right." And I says, "Well, I know where it is, and it's got oil on it, and it's leaking." And they says, "Well, we need proof of that." So right away they put together a team, and they hired a commercial salvage group that went out and they dove on the wreck. And the first thing they wanted to do was get basic information on it. They took measurements. Well, the salvage team measured it at 80 feet long, and Argo's 120. So they says, "Nope, you got the wrong boat. Can't be the Argo. We're not interested. We're not going to do any more." And we got back within, these were all conference calls. We had NOAA on the conference calls, all the Coast Guard, the EPA, there was all kinds of people. And I says, "Look, this is the Argo. We're absolutely positive it's the Argo. What do we got to do to prove it to you?" And he says, "Well, you guys got to go out there and measure it." And I says, okay, we'll do that right away. And they says, well, get back to us when you find out. So we went out and dove it late in the year in all the crappiest, nastiest, roughest weather you can imagine. And we took measurements and videoed the measurements. Dave took his underwater tapes down. We ran across the decks and videotaped it. And we got back in. And when we were out there, we could smell the oil on the surface in the boat. Every time a bubble would come up and it'd break the surface, you got this just distinctive, strong, oily smell. There was no doubt. So we got back on the conference call that night. Noah was there and says, oh, yeah, we've been monitoring it for years. We've been watching. It's been leaking right along. And the Coast Guard's like, what are you guys talking about? And they says, well, nobody complained. And so we figured it wasn't that big of a deal. And so we just would watch it. So anyway, they put the salvage team together. And over the course of about 2 months, they finished up early in December. They pumped out of 250,000 gallons that was on the boat. They pumped out about 35,000 gallons of oil that was still remaining in the wreck and sealed it off. EPA were out there. They brought a special boat in from the East Coast. The EPA that was monitored, was all rigged up with all kinds of sensors for air, water quality, all this kind of stuff. The first dive that the salvage guys went down on, they set off every alarm on the boat. This stuff was bubbling up from the wreck, and it would come to the surface. And so they made everybody wear level, whatever it was, hazmat suits that were on the surface. They had, all the divers had to get special chemical resistant dive gear and helmets and all that. And the one diver that was working on plugging a hole, his face actually was etched. The benzene that was leaking out of it actually cut into the glass plate of his helmet, and it was starting to eat it away.
Wow.
But anyway, they got it cleared out. It was the most significant mitigation of recovery effect that has ever been done on the Great Lakes. It was millions of dollars to get accomplished. And TV show called 16 by 9 is kind of the equivalent of our 60 Minutes here. They came down and did about an hour-long program on all the work that we did and finding the wreck and all the survey work and the salvage work that was done on it. And that was aired in Canada. And they used it kind of as a political ploy to say, look what the Americans are doing. And on Canada, we're ignoring all of these risks. You guys, our government's not doing anything. And the United States is out there, all these things up. So anyway, that was the story of the Argo. It went up originally when they were doing the work. It's the only area I know that the regulatory safety zone, there was no boats were allowed to go within a mile of the wreck area when they were working on it. And the EPA pronounced it inert at this time. They filled everything up with lake water and they got all the oil out of it. So it's a great dive site. It's different than a wooden schooner and any of the steamboats and stuff. It's all steel decking. It's got valves and all kinds of stuff on it, but it's got good wooden rails. All the combing, the bow and the sides are all wooden rub rails around it. There's a little cabin in the back and mast that sticks up. It's kind of a cool little wreck. If anybody gets a chance to dive on it, the location's public.
Very, very cool story.
So that leads us.
Yeah. So Tom, that's a really
that leads us
to one of those wrecks that I suppose you're probably not glad you found. It sounds like it was a lot more trouble in some ways than it was worth.
Well, again, yeah, I'm out there just doing side scan, and we're looking for shipwrecks, and this leads into a lot more than just diving and shipwrecks, and there's all kinds of things that are attached to that, and what's our duty as divers, and how we interface with environmental activities and stuff like that. And so our latest one, another one of my proudest moments here is the lake serpent. I found this in 2015. We did a lot of research on it. It took us a long time to put stuff together because it's so old. And Serpent is the oldest found schooner in Lake Erie. There's nothing this old. It was built in 1821. It sank in 1829. And because it's so early, there really is not very much research information available on it. In fact, I was surprised how much stuff we were able to find about it. But we put a project with Great Lakes Historical, did some dredging. The reason it was so obscure is because it was carrying a load of stone cargo. Caught in a storm, the cargo shifted, it went over on its beam's end, and it sunk laying on its port side. So it's on about a 50-degree angle to the keel. And the starboard up, and the port side's buried almost right to midship into the mud. And in the picture there, you can see that long, straight thing right there is the mast of the boat. When it went over, the mast broke and it went on the bottom. So there's nothing sticking up out of the lake that anybody would see that would tell them that there was a shipwreck there. So it was kind of forgotten. And again, I was out there looking for my long lost Lexington, extending the search pattern. And I ran across this and it surprised me because Brendan, I think you got a picture of the original scan when I spotted it. And looking at side scan for hours and hours and hours and hours as we go along. And this little anomaly shows up on the side scan. Can anybody there tell me where the shipwreck is? That's what I was looking at. And no, it's not that little white spot down in the lower left-hand corner. Anyway, I almost ran over it. 20 feet further to the right, I probably never would have seen it. It's that little tiny white spot there, just down maybe a quarter of a way of the page, right in the middle, close to where the black spot is in the center of the thing. And I knew it wasn't a shipwreck at the time. I said it's too small. It's just a little, it's probably some deck load of something or an old dock that floated out here or a penny or something that has broken off. It definitely was something. And I was just going to keep going. And I got past it a little bit and I says, nah, that's going to bug me. I got to go back there and see what it is. And so when I turned around and went back, it ended up being a shipwreck, but it's only 47 feet. I said 1821 or 1821 is one of the earliest, vessels built then. Again, this is the oldest two-masted schooner in Lake Erie that you can actually physically go down and touch and see and investigate. So again, we put a project together. We did some survey work on it in 2018. Anything last year. I think we're going to go back out and finish up on some of the stuff that we need to do. This hit the television's The Science Channel put together an 1 hour long program on this, which I was very happy with. They did a fantastic job sharing the information and the details and got all of the information correct. It's Science Channel, it's Shipwreck Secrets, it's the program is Haunting of Lake Erie. If anybody wants to try and stream it, I think it's out there available for streaming if you've got a cable program or any kind of internet stuff that allows you to get the news, the Science Channel information, you can get it. But they did an excellent program on it. Smithsonian did a article on it from the Smithsonian. It's again, it's something that we're going to work on. It'll probably be our next listing for the Registry for Historic Places for Ohio. And
very, very cool.
All of that is because of my original efforts to go out there and find the shipwreck to Lexington. Why it's my favorite, I can't tell you what it is. I think when I was doing research and looking at that long list from Captain Hamilton's, that chart that was up there, the Lexington just caught my eye. It sank in the 1840, I think 1846, but it had gold on it and whiskey. So that may have been the reason I was interested in it. Because, when I was out there, I was always going to find a shipwreck and get rich. So I'm still looking for it. I'm still waiting to get rich. but I haven't found it or any gold. And searches, put the search map up there, Brendan.
You bet.
Western Lake Erie. I've covered since I've got the side scan. This doesn't count any of the work I did earlier before side scan time. I had an old bottom sounder that I used, but this is Western Lake Erie, and all those black spots on there, those are all track lines from the survey work. The kind of blackish red stuff is the Battle of Lake Erie work that we did. But I pulled the program up the other day just to check when I was going to come on here. That's 3,500 linear miles of searching.
Wow.
And there's a lot more that hasn't been checked yet. But the boats ran 3,500 straight line miles in those searches. And we found a bunch of wrecks we didn't know that we were going to find. Some really interesting stuff. And there's still more out there that I'm going to be looking for this year.
Very cool.
So with that, Brendan, if you got anything or questions or you want to know something else, but that's pretty much it for me.
Well, Tom, we did have a question from a viewer. They wondered if SOS, Save Ontario Shipwrecks, I believe, was part of the Argo project at all.
No, they weren't involved at that time. I'm a member of the SOS Windsor group, and I was involved in all of the side scan work that they did up off of Point Pelee when they hired Dave Trotter to go over there and do the searching back in the 90s, mostly in the 90s. But no, they haven't. They're still active. The group still gets together and they do some work up there between Pelee and Erie, but they weren't involved in the Argo at all. The Canadians did have their Coast Guard groups, and they had some environmental activity participation. They were on site, and I think they provided some overhead. They had helicopters out there while the survey work was going. I think they participated in that too.
Very cool. Well, Tom, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and those were some amazing stories. I really appreciate you playing along with me and sharing some of those. Some of the stuff that you've done is really unusual and interesting. Not many people have had a project like the Argo or like the War of 1812 work. So, really, really interesting stuff that not a lot of other wreck hunters have done. So thanks so much for coming on and telling those stories and sharing that with our viewers.
My pleasure. I'm glad I could share.
So a couple of housekeeping things before we wrap up. Again, I'd like to remind everybody, and for those of you who joined late, Tom lives in a rural area, and so his internet is good enough to be on, but it was breaking up, and we knew that was going to happen, and I mentioned that to everybody up front. So no need to post, Brendan, the technology is failing. We knew that it was going to be a little choppy. And I think it turned out pretty well. Everything came through pretty clearly, Tom, and I think that'll show up on the recording. So I think it was a great show. A couple other things. Reminder, next week, Kevin Ailes from the Michigan Underwater Preserve Council. Should be an excellent discussion about what's going on there at the Michigan Underwater Preserves, and also a lot of the other things that Kevin has done. And then Mark Sprang, the archivist for the historical collections of the Great Lakes at Bowling Green State University, will be joining us. And we have a number of other people that have agreed to appear. I just haven't slotted them in yet on dates, but a lot of really interesting people coming up. And then don't forget, on April 25th is the Inland Seas Online Shipwreck Festival. For those of us who, I think everybody, is quarantined in our homes, come on and tune in. I've got a pretty good lineup of people. It's to celebrate our 2000th member, which we recently got. And please come and join us. A day full of presentations, followed by a nice Zoom room with a social hour. So thank you again, Tom Kowalczyk, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. Good night, everybody.